Hello and welcome to Afternoons with Ash Black. I'm happy that you all joined us today. We are shooting live from the BKAT studios, having conversations that matter with members of our community that are spreading joy through the sheer virtue of their works. We're happy to talk to these folks today and have conversations with them that are sometimes poignant and questions that might catch them off guard. But ultimately, our goal today is to have a wholesome conversation with a member of our community and share it with you, our audience. I appreciate you very much for joining me today, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we have conversations with folks that live right here in our own backyard, hometown heroes. Thank you. Today it is my pleasure to introduce a very distinguished guest, filmmaker Kelly Hughes. Kelly, welcome to our show.
All right, thank you.
It's so nice to see you today and have you here at BKAT Studios. Welcome. How are you? Why don't you introduce yourself to my guests?
Well, I'm very comfortable being at BKAT because public access TV is where I got my start. In Seattle back in 1991, 31 years ago. I always say, that was like the peak of my talent and ability. Most people get better as a filmmaker as they go on. I kind of got my stride 31 years ago, and it's just been consistent. I've gotten no better, but hopefully no worse. But my show was a 30-minute mini exploitation movie every week. I'd just get people together. I wrote a script. Sometimes I'd call the actors the night before saying, hey, come to my apartment at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. We're going to make a movie. And then after I secured the talent, I would write the script. Hopefully it would be done before they got there. We'd shoot it that weekend. I would edit it by that Wednesday, hand it into the studio that Friday night. We'd watch our movie. And I think it all tapped into my love of exploitation films. When I was a kid, they still had drive-in movie theaters.
Sure.
Back then, you would sneak your friends into the trunk and, you'd pay one ticket and, 4 friends would come with you. I never did that. I kind of like that whole idea, though, of, filmmaking kind of a party, at a drive-in theater. It was usually the sleazy horror movies and sci-fi, action movies. And I have a love of that. And I think, what I used to do, it's what they now call backyard movie making.
Sure.
Get together with your friends, use what you have, whether it's your backyard or, in my case, a 1-bedroom apartment in the University District in Seattle, and just make movies.
What was that process for you like in the 80s and early 90s? I can't imagine, with today's technology and the ability to just plug and play, point and shoot, it could have ever been so simple. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what filmmaking was like and your struggles at that time?
Well, nowadays with what kids are doing with YouTube, the average, probably 15-year-old kid could do what I did with his iPhone. Mm-hmm. Back then, it seemed like a big deal because it's what we called prosumer equipment. You had VHS cameras, high 8, or professional stuff. There wasn't an in-between, but when I started doing this, we finally had cameras where consumers could approach professional stuff. It was still analog. It was still editing videotape. You had to, I couldn't afford 2 decks. So I used my camera as a playback deck, then used my deck as the recording deck for the final. And it was just a lot of rewinding and fast forwarding. It wasn't digital where you could leap an hour ahead of time. So I was, putting a lot of wear and tear on my equipment, mm-hmm. But I had my own equipment at home. And that was very rare back then. So I think for me, it was more like it was a dream come true to have that equipment and have, my own time slot on public access TV. What am I going to do with that? I didn't want to make a talk show. I wanted to make something that had a script and actors. I kind of went into it blindly, not knowing how much work it would be.
Sure.
If I knew how much work, I probably wouldn't have done it because it was just insane. I worked a full-time job unrelated to this. So every waking hour when I wasn't working, a kind of tedious office job, I funneled all that creativity into my crazy TV show called Heart Attack Theater.
Heart Attack Theater.
Heart Attack Theater. Friday nights at 10 p.m. on Channel 29 in Seattle. That was my time slot for a few years. And one thing about YouTube is you can see how many people watch your video. We had no idea if anyone was watching our TV show. There were no Nielsen ratings for public access TV. So we kind of did it blindly, hoping, someone was watching even what we were doing. The only time I ever knew if someone watched my TV show was when one of my actors would be out in public, and someone would say, "Oh my gosh, you were in that crazy TV show on Channel 29," or, "Oh my God, I saw you give birth to a giant snake last week."
Right.
And
what did that feel like for you the first time you ran into somebody who had seen one of your films on public television and expressed interest or disgust or joy? What was that like for you?
Well, because I didn't act on it, I didn't have that face recognition, but I remember doing a screening at a venue. I think it was the Velvet Elvis Theater, which is a funky space in Pioneer Square in Seattle. And they had some kind of film program, and I really wasn't included in a lot of stuff back then. They didn't have a lot of independent film festivals back then. Mm-hmm. It was still like Sundance and, Seattle Film Festival. There wasn't a lot of low budget kind of venues for that. But they had a screening, and I think that was the first time I got to be in an audience where strangers could see my work. And they actually did show my episode where a woman gave birth to a giant snake. Wow. So it was outside on the sidewalk when someone said, "Did you make that? Wow, that was so cool." And that was, it took a year into doing all this when I actually got direct feedback from someone that I didn't know. The other thing is, this was on cable TV. I did not have cable TV at the time, so I couldn't even watch my own show at home.
So you really didn't get to see a lot of these things air, though you submitted them. No. But admittedly, you've always been kind of a self-starter, and that kind of started back there. Would you say that you have an insatiable work ethic, or that you just have an insatiable desire to create?
I have kind of a conditional work ethic. When I schedule something, I'll be real diligent, and show up on time, lead the actors, and finish it. I think the tough part a lot of indie filmmakers have, it's not the start, it's actually finishing. And some people will sit on footage for a year or two and never edit it. And I know what that feels like. That's the tough part, is the finishing.
A term often referred to as putting it on the shelf, right?
Putting it on the shelf.
Just shelf it for a little while.
And it's only because I had this time slot on Channel 29 that I had to turn it in by Wednesday.
Sure.
And then they showed it Friday because I lived in fear if I didn't turn that in on time. They were depending on an original show. It's not like you could just assume they'll put a rerun in or, add something else. I felt like if I ever missed that deadline, I would lose my time slot.
Right.
And I think that's the one thing indie artists, we all have digital technology, YouTube, we're free to create now, but we don't have deadlines.
So most people aren't as fastidious about it.
On YouTube, if you don't, do a video once a week or whatever, YouTube's not going to shut down your channel.
Right.
So how do you create those deadlines for yourself as an independent artist? And I think that's the one discipline I had was I learned no matter what, I could write a script. I could, shoot all that footage on Saturday and Sunday. On Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday night after work, I could edit that so that by Wednesday I could turn that in. It was time management and saying, I'm going to sacrifice a personal life for the sake of this show.
Sure.
Where every waking hour, I wasn't at this 9-to-5 job. I'm just editing a lot of videotape.
So that we make sure to touch on a lot of the things that you have going on presently, I'd like to ask you a few questions about things that you've done recently.
Sure.
But before doing so, I'd like to ask you, do you still describe yourself as an exploitation director, and how do you feel the reception is in today's environment for films that are considered under that genre? Do we still see a warm welcome to films like that, or do you feel like that's a genre that is being pushed aside for what some may consider progress?
Mm-hmm. Well, back then people used to say more like horror. Maybe I even promoted that. When I first started, I called my show a suspense anthology.
Nice.
I'd say, oh, it's like Twilight Zone or Alfred Hitchcock Presents, because I had to tell my actors something to lure them in.
Sure.
Like, what are we getting ourselves into? So I made it seem classier than it was. Oh, it's like Twilight Zone, except with no budget.
Right.
But I think when I brought it to the marketplace or even put stuff out on home video, which I did later in the 90s, on VHS tapes.
Sure.
Even you could rent it at Scarecrow Video in Seattle. Like, some of my work actually got into video stores, which still amazes me.
Right.
This is like no budget. Although now there's kind of like this whole thing of shot on video projects from the 80s and 90s, which are kind of in vogue now.
I've seen that recently.
I was so ashamed of my low budget back then. Now it's kind of cool to say, oh, wow, I made this crappy looking stuff on video.
I'm seeing a re-release in your future.
Exactly. But I think I got grouped into the horror category. And it was only like a few years ago where I realized, no, it's not horror, because there's a lot of humor. I look at my stuff and I think a lot of it's funny, even though I took it seriously. To me, it's almost like an homage to those cheesy movies.
Sure, the campiness of, some of the more celebrated horror films in the genre.
Right. Not quite Plan 9 from Outer Space, but still that knowingness that we have no budget, and this is just a grassroots kind of thing. But as for the exploitation thing, I do like that tag. The thing about exploitation, Hollywood has totally assimilated that.
Sure.
So it's not a shameful thing anymore. In fact, you look at Netflix, if you look deep, half that stuff is exploitation with a big budget and Hollywood actors.
It's an interesting point that you bring up. I mean, it's easy to turn on any one of the streaming venues and see shows like My 500-Pound Life or Hoarders, where it's clearly somebody's misery being put on display for the sake of those that are interested. So
sure,
could that be exploitation? I think I would agree with you. And
like
I would
reality
say very much
exploitation.
So. The exploitation of reality.
Like, that's like pure exploitation. Then you have narrative, just movies.
Sure.
Like, I think like American Horror Story. That's like a very glamorized exploitation. Recognizable actors, good budgets, it looks good, but those plots and storylines, that's cheesy horror from the 60s and 70s.
Absolutely.
But it's more palatable because it looks good. Now, for me personally, I've got lines that I won't cross either. Mm-hmm. And I can even look at stuff and say, yeah, that's a little distasteful. Maybe because it's real. It's one thing in a fictional story to explore these things because they're not real.
Sure.
But then you put Anna Nicole Smith on camera and she's obviously doped up.
Yeah.
That's probably exploiting her, and that's suddenly not entertaining.
Well, and absolutely to the degree of those that, profit from the degradation of the individual. Sadly, you watch somebody like that decline on camera. Yeah. But you're drawn to it because it's a sideshow. And for somebody like Anna Nicole Smith specifically, it made good television for those that were profiting from it. So, is it a train wreck? Yes. But should we film it? Maybe some would say that in their words, they would say, yes, maybe we should film this and make it available for the public.
It's a fine line because the person's giving their consent. I'm sure Anna Nicole signed a lot of paperwork, but then it's up to the people that even if there is that signed consent, what are your judgment calls? Oh, Anna's good today. This is good footage. Oh, today, though, she's doped up.
Right.
Maybe let's turn the cameras off and let Anna have some private time.
Yeah.
So I think there's just lots of little judgment calls. But at the same time, there's this catharsis, too. It's human nature to be fascinated by human nature.
True.
But it's safe when we do it in a movie because actors are playing those parts. You know, so if Scarlett Johansson is playing an Anna Nicole type of character in a movie, there's a safety in exploring that.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, Scarlett's not physically, you know, putting herself in harm's way.
Right.
But you know what? We all individually have to make those choices, you know, because social media in many different levels is all about exploitation.
This is true. Let's talk about some of your current work. I had a conversation with you recently. We were over at the West Sound Film Festival here in Bremerton. You've had a showing that I've been fortunate enough to see 2 years running. You know, most recently, you worked with a local band, the Electric KoolAid Party, and covered a music video for them. You self-produced and directed it here at the lovely Bay Bowl Theater, a relic of Bremerton, here on East Bremerton. Tell me a little bit about that video, you know, what it was like filming for you, and what it was like taking it to the West Sound Film Festival this year.
Sure. Well, you know, I moved to Port Orchard 10 years ago from Seattle, and I've used film as a way to get involved in the community, you know, and the whole thing about, like, you know, the Bay, Bayview, Bay Bowl, which I didn't know much about before that, and just learning the story of it, thinking, wow, this is really cool. And someone was overseeing it at the time. It was closed. It was practically condemned. All the seats had been pulled out. All the carpet had been ripped out. It was just concrete, no electricity. It was pitch dark inside. And someone said, you know, this is going to be torn down and it's going to be gone, but this is a very loved place. A lot of people grew up seeing movies here, going bowling here. We got to do something. They didn't quite know what, but I agreed. And I think when an outsider comes into a situation like that, maybe they see it in a different light too. Like, yeah, this is just a really cool structure. What's the best use of this? At first I thought, oh, let's make a little horror movie here. Because it's like, you know, remember that last scene in the Blair Witch Project?
Yeah.
And that guy is facing the corner.
He's down in the basement of that building, and it's all in the green visual, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
And when you go in the basement of the Bayview, it looks like that final scene. Concrete block walls. But then I thought, you know, that's too obvious. What else can we do to pull in another local angle? And that's where I knew this guy named Pat Moriarty, local artist. And I knew that his son had a band called the Electric KoolAid Party. In my head, I thought, we need a young, hip band. It's like this old history of the theater meets this new, fresh band that's, you know, from Port Orchard. And it just clicked, and I thought, what a send-off to a theater than to have a live performance. And that's when everything else clicked into motion. I thought, okay, the band plays, they summon up the spirits of the theater, a little Night of the Living Dead rebirth action with zombies. And then at the end, the zombies kind of vibe to the band, and the minute the song's over, the zombies collapse, they're dead. That's the end of the theater.
What was it like for you going through that experience? And, you know, as you said, you wanted to bring life back to this theater. Do you feel like you did it that day?
Yes, in 98-degree weather. Although, and you were part of that, and you were really good in it. Ash, you were one of the zombies.
This is true.
And I think half the people there didn't know they were going to be zombies ahead of time, which I think helped. Because sometimes if you had like the night before to worry about it, you'd be a frazzled mess. So it's like, okay, you're doing hair and makeup, but you're also going to be a zombie. Oh, and your boyfriend here is going to be a zombie. And the camera guy, you're going to be a zombie. And your daughter's going to be a zombie. Oh, and Ash, you're going to be a zombie too.
You're going to be a zombie too.
It was kind of like that. But I love working with people who are not regular actors either. I love that energy of just regular untrained people being an actor. Although I know you're training now, so it'd probably be a slightly different experience.
My pay rate just went up.
Pay rate went up, but you were really good. And I love seeing natural talent like that. And I think as a director, you create this little forum so that everyone else can shine. You know, a director might have a vision, but they're not putting the spotlight on themselves. They're putting the spotlight on the talent. And it was a big space to wrangle. I was up on the second floor where I think the projection booth used to be, which was all ripped out. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I had one of those little cutout windows to film through. And I was so far away, it was really hard to communicate. But if you're going to use this gigantic landmark, you want to show off the architecture. You want to show off the vastness of it. So I think my challenge was to show off just the big, creepy atmosphere of this building.
Kelly, we so appreciate you using Bremerton and the people of Bremerton as a focus, for your films, and just you're bringing to light, valuable subjects through that work that I think people need to discuss in this town. We're in our final few moments, so without trying to cut you too short, I would like to ask you two final questions in your own words. What makes this community special to you, and how could you see us grow as a community?
Well, first part, what makes it special? In one word, it's Gorst. Because I think moving here, I live in Port Orchard, and when I go, to Bremerton, you pass through that little hairpin turn known as Gorst. And, if I'm in a new town, I'm going to gravitate to, the dive bar that has like the worst karaoke. Or I'm just going to gravitate to what's gritty, because I love character. I like making movies because I like interesting people and grittiness, and I don't want to make everything shiny and perfect looking. And I just thought, you know what? Seattle has this grunge rock kind of reputation, and Twin Peaks, and when I did my stuff, Northern Exposure, we kind of had this, I wouldn't say fake, but to the rest of the world, they thought Seattle was this gritty Northwest representation. It took me coming out here to Kitsap to think, no, that's not Seattle, that's Gorst. And Kitsap is like the real gritty part of the Northwest. And I like the authenticity. And again, it's not to bash Seattle, but when I moved here, Seattle was just getting a little too full of itself. And Gorst and Kitsap was such a breath of fresh air where people were not being ironically gritty or self-aware. And that self-awareness is the death of art. And when you just crave authentic people, it's not like we took Belltown and gentrified it and then put back, a gritty little bar there. Mm-hmm. No, I want to see the bar that hasn't changed in 50 years, that has old pool tables with, torn up felt that hasn't been repaired. That's what I think of it as out here, but with, a genuine warmth too. And I think that's the thing is, when you go for the grit, you also find that warmth. And I like the contrast of those two.
I would agree with that statement completely. How would you like to see us grow as a community?
Just not grow.
Just not grow.
Not gentrify, not bring every aspect that I ran away from in Seattle and bring it here. Don't overdevelop. That being said, that's probably inevitable. So instead of complaining about it, don't get caught up in a trend. Still focus on your own personal work. And as creators, we have to create our own mini little empires. So find people that you like to work with. Find your own circle of colleagues. And then concentrate on that and don't worry about what the other people are doing. If you can make alliances with those other people, that's really cool. But don't spend a lot of time worrying about things outside your own circle. Because your own circle is enough. So, Kitsap is a big enough area that I'm sure you can find at least 10 or 20 like-minded people that want to do what you're doing.
And I think they exist out there. Filmmaker, director, and you're also the owner of the Gorst Underground Film Festival.
Oh my
Kelly
goodness.
Hughes, thank you so much for being on our show today.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.